Think of the number of days it took to count votes, and think of the way the results in India come by the afternoon, by 3:30 or 4 of the day of results. You know who's winning.
Yeah.
Contrast it with other countries. Contrast it with the US. Contrast it with the UK. When you're sitting and counting paper ballots, I feel that the rest of the world is really, really very much behind us when it comes to election technology.
Hi everyone, welcome back to the WAC Indian History Podcast. I'm Utkarsh.
Namaskar, Sumedha, and it is wonderful to see you because it's been a long gap. And I don't know whether you guys missed us, but we missed you.
Yes, for sure. I think this is the longest gap we've taken. I feel like our December break was nothing compared to the length of this one.
Yes. So I was traveling in India and some other stuff came up. But we are back. And since we are just a two-person setup here, you will have to bear with us a little bit. Some of these little gaps are going to happen.
Yeah, I mean AI can't just fully do our jobs just yet. It still
Not
needs
just
some,
yet.
Still needs some human intervention.
Utkarsh, AI can never replace me. Never ever.
Never say never.
Can't happen. No. That will be the day. Do you want an AI aunt? I doubt if you do.
I doubt that either. But good, since we have been away, we had also some time to reflect and think about, I wouldn't say experiments, but variations that we wanted to try in terms of how we bring forward the information that we do. And today, whether you like it or not, I think you, the audience, are going to be subject of said experiment. Because we're going to try out a new format.
And we may try out other new formats also. So be ready.
Yeah. So one of the things that we wanted to do in general was make it easier to access this wealth of information that we are trying to put out there, right? Because it's a lot of information. Each topic, every time we get into it, I feel like we've barely scratched the surface and there are nuggets of information spread out all over the podcast. So what we're going to do this time is we're going to do it in the form of structured questions and answers, which means that there are questions on each of our minds. There are hot questions associated with any particular topic that you can think of. And what we'll try and do is I'm going to be the person asking the question. And then we'll get the answer. And then we'll kind of go a little bit back and forth. But then you can easily access the information for each of the top questions that you may have linked to any particular topic.
And in fact, Utkarsh, for our next podcasts, I think we can also invite questions. We can tell them what we're going to talk
absolutely.
about. And then we'll invite questions on Twitter, on Instagram, on Facebook, on YouTube itself, of course. So that will be fun. If you want your questions answered, ask them.
Yeah, that's a great thing because then what you can get is, I'm sure there are things on your mind. So then you will know what the topic is for upcoming week. And then, it's very collaborative that way to do it in that particular format. So, what's the topic of today? What's on people's mind this month of April 2024 in India? Is anything in particular going on? I can't think of anything.
Nothing at all. Nothing at all, of course. It's all calm and quiet in India. People going about their business, doing nothing.
Yeah.
Well, I am just back from India and I can tell you that elections are in the air.
Yes.
They are everywhere. They are on everyone's minds. That's what's being discussed. And now, of course, campaigning is at full fettle. It's really all engines are on at the moment. So we cannot do anything else except talk about elections. Isn't that so?
Exactly. And what we wanted to do is it's the WAC Indian History Podcast. So you do have a little bit of history. But we also wanted to look at history in the context of the contemporary lens. Right, and kind of compare, contrast, and put things into context. So, which is why we have taken the liberty of coming up with 10 questions. I don't know whether we'll get through all 10, but let's try. It really depends on how long each of your answers are.
No, we'll try to get through all 10.
We'll get through all of them.
We'll try to, we'll try at least.
Okay. So, without further ado, let's get into those 10 questions. I'm going to go with the first one. And this is actually something that I have been very interested in, right? I primarily read foreign media, actually. I'm a little bit more disconnected from India. And one of the things that I always see a little bit of grudging respect for India in the foreign media, regardless of whatever lens, say even the Economist or the New York Times, is it is. I think everybody acknowledges it's a democracy. I mean, there are other people who say other things, but in general, the consensus is India is a democracy, is an electoral democracy. So what I wanted to ask is, how did India, such a large country, such a diverse country, succeed as an electoral democracy against all the odds post 1947? Because it was not taken for granted, right? A lot of things happened to plenty of other post-colonial nations. So what, in your opinion, and also with some facts, do you think helped India succeed?
I think it's a really very good question. In 1947, when we became independent and then we decided that we would be a republic and we would be a democracy, there was skepticism everywhere.
Okay.
So we were 33 crore people, okay? And literacy was as low as 15 to 20%. So that means 80% of the population was illiterate. Poverty was huge. The number of problems in terms of, the basics, health, education, housing, everything, it was terrible. So how was this country to become a democracy? Remember, we had just gone through the partition, which was horrific violence and literally cutting off of the hands and legs of the country in a very brutal way. So there was nothing really to say that this, what was called an experiment, would succeed. So you just have to look at the headlines of the Economists and the New York Times and the Guardians and the Times of London of those days and see the skepticism that was there about this country. See, in 1946, we had the Constituent Assembly set up. So between 46 and 49, the Constituent Assembly was working to give the blueprint of the Constitution, and then it had to be adopted. We of course became independent somewhere in the middle, that is in 1947. In 1950 we became a republic, and after that there was this urgency to hold an election. There was this urgency to prove to the world that India could hold an election. At the time, there were a lot of things that India did simply to prove to people that it could do these things. It was always a kind of defensive posture, with people throwing things at us and saying, you can't do this, you can't do that. And India saying, no, we are going to be able to do it. So that was the way it was. There was this whole urgency to hold elections. So in 1950, we became a republic. We know the date. And elections were held in 1952 basically, although you know how many phases there were? There were 68 phases.
How long did it take?
Because of, it took from end of 1951 to 1952.
Okay.
So the first constituency to go to vote was in 1951 around October. This was a place in Himachal Pradesh called Chini, and it used to bear allegiance to the Panchan Lama, and it was a completely different world in itself. But it did go to vote, the first one, because after that it would be closed for a good 4, 5, 6 months because of acute winter and snow. It would be blocked off from the world. So this was the first place, Chini. It was called Chini. This was the first place where votes were actually cast in 1951. And then there were 68 phases because roads were few, trains were also few, means of communication were poor, roads and bridges and of course flights were very, 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 very few, although there were some. So how were people to get to all these places, set up polling booths, etc.? Therefore a lot of time was given. So to all those people who are saying, what is this, so many phases in which elections are being held, think of it, there were 68 phases in the first election. But all this had to be done. Just consider the statistics, just think of the number of people. So there was universal adult suffrage in the constitution. So everyone above 21, men as well as women. Out of the 33 crores, 17.6 crores were eligible to vote. Now, how were the electoral rolls to be prepared? How were all these names to be put down? Who was going to go there, write down the names? Who would audit these electoral rolls? Who would register these voters? And then how would people vote? There was this problem of illiteracy. So you could not just write the name of the candidate and ask the person to vote for the candidate. Therefore, this idea of symbols came up. Because anyone
is
can
symbols
recognize a
unique to
symbol.
India? No, right? I think every party has.
I think symbols are unique to India in the sense that they are also put on the actual voting
But actually,
list.
I can actually answer because I just voted for the presidential election in Singapore. This symbol there also, by the way. So
Did your candidate win?
yes, I think the candidate to
Oh,
vote
okay,
for
good,
was
good.
obvious, but that's a different story. Let's not get into Singapore politics. But yes, there were symbols here as well in Singapore.
Okay. But was it kind of a long list with the names of all the candidates and their symbols
There were
next
just
to them?
3 for this one.
Okay.
I will be voting.
Name and symbol.
Name and symbol. Yes.
Okay. So you see what the difference was in the Indian election. There were separate ballot boxes for each of the candidates with the symbol stamped on the ballot box for easy recognition. It was only much later that the entire candidate list started being printed out together, and then you had name, symbol, like anyone else. For the first elections, there were separately colored ballot boxes for everyone, and the symbols were there on the ballot box so that you could just go up and put your vote in the correct ballot box.
Okay.
So, Utkarsh, there were no ballot boxes in India either. So they also had to be made. And all this was, how many ballot boxes had to be made? 2 million, as in manufactured. So, the first election commissioner, his name was Sukumar Sen. Sukumar Sen of Presidency College in Calcutta, and then he had studied in the UK. He was in the Indian Civil Services, and he became the first election commissioner. And he was the one who had to decide on all these very difficult questions. What would the shape of the ballot box be? What would it be made of? What would the color be? Think of all the nitty-gritties. All these had to be decided just then. And we were just, not in a very good space as a country. We were just recovering from violence. There were a lot of displaced people, refugees, for whom a lot had to be done. Administration was not in place because remember it had been divided into 2.
Yeah.
And half the things had been sent off to Pakistan. So administration was not in a very good place. Now our country and all the geography which had to be traversed was almost 1 million miles square with difficult terrain. We have deserts, we have mountains, we have rivers, we have everything. We have all kinds of obstructions as far as the weather is concerned. So people had to be trained to do this. To prepare the electoral rolls, I think about 16,000 people were hired to write down the names and to prepare those electoral rolls. So you can imagine that there was everything had to be done from scratch. The system itself was the Westminster model, which we copied from the UK, wherein you voted for one person from each party could stand from each constituency.
Yeah.
Although there was a lot of discussion about that too. Should 2 people stand from a constituency? How they should be reserved? Should they be reserved for the scheduled caste, for the minorities, etc.? So the system was that some would be reserved for the scheduled caste. There would be no minority reservations because that was what had led to partition. And then it would be the first past the post system. So whoever got the most votes would win. That was the kind of simple way in which this was thought of, because you look at other systems such as France, it's very complicated. Or even look at the electoral college system of the US. It's not that straightforward,
No,
because the
it's not.
popular vote and the
Different.
electoral college
Yes.
vote percentage become different.
Yes.
So that way ours is a more straightforward kind of system. So, when the electoral rolls were being made, there were some very peculiar situations which would arise because both men and women had the vote. So many women wrote their names as mother of so-and-so, wife of so-and-so. So Sukumar Sen took it very personally that he would not let such women vote, because he said that In his thinking, they had to be dragged to the 20th century, and they could not say that they were mothers or wives of somebody or the other. So 40 lakh such names were found in the electoral rolls. And
Okay.
out of that, 28 lakh women refused to change. They would not give their own names. They insisted on being identified as mother or a wife or so and so. So
Yeah.
you know what? Their rights to vote were taken away. They were struck off the electoral rolls. Speaking as a woman, this kind of bugs me, because you are trying to force someone to meet your standards or whatever it is, but you can't take away their voting rights because of that. So for 28 lakh women, because of this insistence of Sukumar Sen, whereas they were eligible to vote, they were struck off the electoral rolls. So although we can praise the first election effort, well, it is praiseworthy, but there were definitely, very kind of personality quirks. Lots of personality quirks. So as you can imagine that most of the entire scene as far as parties are concerned was dominated by the Congress party. The Congress party was the most popular one. But then there were a number of other parties which were also standing for election. So you had different blocks, there were communist bloc parties, actually one communist party which later split into two. Then you had the Hindu Mahasabha, then you had some other parties speaking for the Hindus, so to speak. Then there was a group of socialist parties. Utkarsh, if you look at it today, these groups still remain. You still have the Congress. You still have the Hindu party, so to speak, the Bharatiya Janata Party. You still have the socialist Lohia group of parties, which is, the Samajwadi Party. So the different divisions and the different interest groups which came forward during the time of independence, first elections, is not all that different. What has happened is that out of the total number of seats, about there were 489 seats all as a whole. Today they are 543. Then there were about 489 seats, and the Congress won 364. It got 45% of the votes and it got 74% of the seats. So you see how much of a difference there is, which is why election predictions in India are a very tough job. Converting vote shares into seat shares
It's difficult.
is very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. But can you guess which was the next most successful party?
Hopefully not the Communist Party. Or was it?
It was the Communist Party.
People loved the Red Terror in Russia. And,
Yes.
and Mao's Cultural Revolution hadn't happened yet. As far as it happened in 60s, right? So, but Red Terror had
So
already
it hadn't happened yet. Yes. But not to worry, the communists were amazingly popular. Okay, they just got 16 seats compared to 364.
Yeah.
But considering that the other parties got 1 or 2, 16 was still, they were the major opposition.
Yeah.
And remember, there was one nation, one election. So that means all the states, there were 18 at the time, also went to polls on the same day, same time. You were voting for the state and you were voting for the central elections. So all the state governments were made by the Congress except one. One guess again, please.
Bengal, Kerala.
Kerala. Communists.
Yes.
It was the communists in Kerala. So Indians have, they've had some attraction for the communists. I remember when I had first joined a book club over here and we discussed some Second World War books, and maybe I come through as more of a communist supporter than the average European or the average American. So some of those ladies used to ask me, what on earth do they teach you in India? Why are you so pro-communist and why are you so sympathetic to them? So perhaps there is something in India, Utkarsh, that was very pro-communist. Today, of course, the communists have shrunk to such a level that they may not remain a national party. You have to have 4% of the national vote to remain a national party. So there's a good chance that they will not remain a national party. Most of their governments have gone except the one in Kerala for the moment.
Yeah.
But well, they are no longer the force that they used to be. But yes, they were very important at the time. And then there was also the Hindu Mahasabha and the Jan Sangh, all of which they died out, and then finally the Bharatiya Janata Party took its place after some more changes, etc. But then the story of the first election is a story of, I think, hope and desire and what can I say, belief that yes, we are going to be able to do it. And after it was done, and after it was all successfully done, taking into account the geographical problems, all the logistical problems, etc., the same sense of disbelief was there. How can these illiterate people vote? But Utkarsh, I have my own opinion about this. I don't think you have to be literate to understand politics. I don't think you have to be literate to understand your own problems and how they are going to be solved. In India, there has been this desire to be part of the political process. What do you think?
So let me put it this way. I feel like what seems like immediately a good thing and what is actually a good thing can often be very different. I think welfare is a great example of that, where if I give you free money or free food or free electricity, it looks like a very good thing to you. But welfare would, if you look at somewhere like Argentina, now they're trying to fix it with Milei. But welfare is terrible for...
No, I agree with all that, but
So
what does literacy have to do with it?
No, maybe not literacy. What I'm trying to say is, I think you do need to have... Maybe it's just my opinion since you asked me the question. I think it is difficult to have an appreciation of what it takes to run a successful government or a successful organization or a successful administration with just your own daily perspective. You need to do some reading up, some research to actually have an informed point of view, in my opinion.
I don't know.
That doesn't mean you should vote, by the way. I'm not saying you should vote. I'm just saying that I believe that you cannot have an appreciation until you do a little bit of... That's where the literacy part comes in, I guess, is what I'm trying to say.
For me, I think taking part in the political process in the country is something which runs in the blood of Indians.
Sure.
Because remember, for thousands of years, we've had local self-government. Even in, say, Kautilya's Arthashastra, you have people called the Gram Vriddha, who are what you would call the panchayat today, or the elders of the village. And we've spoken about this before when we spoke about India as the mother of democracy. And the fact that in India, even the monarchical system was not the off with your head types, but with a lot of participation of the people. So I think there was a kind of muscle memory of that participation, which had of course gone away for quite some time, but I think there was a muscle memory. Of course, there were some provincial elections during British times, but they did not have universal adult suffrage. So this kind of large scale affair was not there. In my humble opinion, I think Indians are hardwired for democracy.
Okay.
They are hardwired for participation in the political process. Aren't Indians overly political minded?
That's for sure. Yeah.
And they are absolutely interested in every little detail of politics. Well, sometimes it's not so much about governance, and it's more about, gossip and more about, having fun. And elections are the biggest festival around there.
Yeah.
Bigger than sometimes our Diwali, Holi also.
Yeah.
But I think Indians are hardwired. And there was a sincere commitment from the leadership of the time that elections would be held and in as free and fair a manner as possible. So just contrast it with the other half, with that part which was sliced off from India. In 51, we were starting our elections, and in 51, they shot their president. And then there you go, the whole country just went into a free fall. Liaquat Ali was shot dead in October 1951. Just about the same time that the first votes were being cast in 1951.
So it's the same country that's been divided into two, the same civilization. What's the difference in your opinion?
I think what happened during the time of partition is that from India, the richest and the most feudal of the Muslim population moved to Pakistan. leaving the poor behind. So the
Okay.
people who went there, they were the rich, feudal, control everyone types.
Okay.
And a lot of course, the Hindus were pushed back and pushed away into here. They took over all the property and the money, etc., of all the rich people also. So it seems to me that in the Punjab, and remember, Punjab is the driving force of
Yeah.
Pakistan,
Yes. Of
Punjab
course.
province of
Yeah.
Pakistan.
Yeah.
In the Punjab, the control of these feudal elements, because see, they were the ones who had started off this idea of partition. They had got this country for themselves, and then they were ready to control it. So that is one reason,
So it's a bit like, say, modern day Iran, in the sense that the needs of elite few outweigh the needs of the rest.
yes, that's true, isn't it? Even today, Utkarsh,
Yeah.
in Pakistan, isn't that what's happening? And that is what has happened over the past 70 years. So look at where all their indices are. They were pretty well off in the 50s, even till the 60s. I would say even till the 80s, they were not that badly off. So they
Yeah, I mean,
sustained
Pakistan was an
whatever they had.
important part of Nixon connecting with Mao, right? They were the conduit, and they were, as a consequence, very, very well supported by the US till I think about the 80s. Not just because of
Yes.
that, but in general. But yeah, that was probably
That, of course, there's a lot of geopolitics to it,
Yeah.
and a separate total ball game. But something that we have to really think about, because your question is a very valid one. If it is the same civilization, the same people, if they are, and in fact, I would say that a lot of the ancient records that we have for democratic processes, they come from the Northwest.
Pakistan.
So we have people like Panini writing in his grammatical exposition about the elections. So where was Panini from? He was from Salatura. Salatura is in the northwest. So it is in Pakistan right now.
And it
And again-
wasn't any religious fundamentalism that was the difference in 51, right? It was purely power jockey.
No, Utkarsh. No, Utkarsh. I think it is also to do with religious fundamentalism.
Okay.
Because I think that a lot of the democratic roots belong to the Vedic or the Sanatani civilization. They do not belong to Islam.
Okay.
Islam has never had any truck with democracy unless it has been forced to. So the Islamic way of operating is that religion is politics and politics is religion.
Okay.
So religious leaders are political leaders. Look at all these countries. Look at Iran, for example.
Ayatollah.
So religious leaders are political leaders and vice versa. And religious law is the law of the land. So that indeed, I think, is one of the other factors which has hobbled Pakistan in its journey, if at all there is a journey to be a democracy.
That makes, yeah, I think you're right. As you said, as we explored that democracy, while associated with Greece, is very much ingrained in the roots of the essence of the civilization that
Yeah.
is in the Indian subcontinent.
Yes,
the
yes.
ancient. Okay, that
And we have records of elections, if we not that far back as my Mauryan period, but the Chola period, you have what are called the Uttar Meru inscriptions regarding elections, panchayat elections,
Yeah,
etc. So
yeah.
that, even that, which I think of as very recent, because
Yeah.
I'm an ancient Indian historian,
Yeah.
it's not that recent. It's about 1,000 years ago.
Yeah. Okay.
So Pakistan started off on this very unfortunate trajectory, and it has not come back from that. It has just not come back from that. Whereas India has gone from strength to strength because, let's face it, there was a lot of interfering with the elections till the time that we had T.N. Session, who took over as the election commissioner in the 90s. Before that, there was a lot of interference with the elections and lots of booth capturing. So, Utkarsh, I remember some of the elections of my youth. Youth, no, extreme childhood, let us say. So that would be in the 70s. So my father, your grandfather, was an intensely political person. He used to take us to vote, to the voting booth. But whenever we would reach the voting booth, it would be taken over by pahalwans. By those, they were, booth capturing was a very lucrative activity.
In Bihar.
All the local Patna. All the local criminals would get extra employment during election time because they would be hired to capture the booth. So they would beat up anyone who would want to go to vote. So I remember we went there. There was this huge kerfuffle and people were beaten up and somebody's leg was broken. So after that, we just came back without voting.
But you would 70s.
So this kind of booth.
Yeah.
What were you
The
asking?
70s were you voting already?
No, I went with my father.
Okay. For the spectacle.
I was not voting for the spectacle. And, he used to take us not just for the voting, he used to also take us to see the results. So, I have been to see the results of that very, very important 1980 election. When Indira Gandhi lost, the one after the emergency. And Utkarsh, today we have the elections at our fingertips. Whatever data you want, just go to the Election Commission of India website.
Yeah.
Even the results are, you can almost get it in real time. But what was it like earlier? How did you get the results? So you had no way of knowing unless you listened to the radio. And the radio had news only twice a day. And if you wanted to know what was happening, in one place in each tier 2 city, not the tier 1, but tier 2, tier 3 cities, there was a PTI center. That is Press Trust of India. It had a ticker. So you could sit there and look at the ticker and then it would slowly tick, 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 tick tell you, okay, this one has this much votes, this one has this much votes. So basically, if you sat through the night, in Ranchi there was a place called Firailal, and in that Firailal Chowk was the ticker. So that is where one would go at night. I remember going there at night and we saw the victory of Mrs. Indira Gandhi. There were some parts of the crowd who were very happy, some parts of the crowd who were very sad. But perhaps I have been such a political person because my father was one. After all, he took us there and we were children. So I have been to vote, I have been to see results, and always being really a part of the whole process that is going through, that the country is going through. And the ways, the technology, the methods of conducting the elections, keeping an eye on all the people who are running for elections, and then tabulating the results, things have really changed. So think of the paper ballots and then think of the EVMs. Think of the number of days it took to count votes and think of the way the results in India come by the afternoon, by 3:30 or 4 of the day of results. You know who's winning.
Yeah.
Contrast it with other countries. Contrast it with the US. Contrast it with the UK. When you're sitting and counting paper ballots, I feel that the rest of the world is really, really very much behind us when it comes to election technology. That's because we have a huge group of people, who are going for elections. And we have to do things in the most efficient way.
Yeah, you don't have a choice when you're that big and that spread out.
Yeah, you don't have a choice. Yeah.
So what thought, and we are not massive fans of, say, Mr. Nehru on this podcast, but
Yes.
at least under his watch, at least from a democracy point of view, the India went in the correct direction. What are your thoughts?
Yes, definitely. And, he was neither shot like Liaquat Ali, nor was he deposed, nor did he try to become the unelected leader or dictator like his daughter did.
Yeah.
So yes, we can give him some marks for that. But Utkarsh, if you read his descriptions of his election campaigning, and he did a lot of it, you've got to give it to him. He did a huge amount of campaigning across the country. But my goodness, he was so condescending. You should read his letters to his, I shall delicately call her his lady friend, Lady Mountbatten.
Edwina Mountbatten.
So he used to write everything to his lady friend, all his dearest thoughts and all his ideas and everything. So his letters to Edwina are very, very illuminating. On the subject of the first elections, he wrote to her about this too. So you do know that it was said that Mountbatten used to run the government through Edwina, because whatever Edwina said to Nehru, he would do. And there was a lot of interference in the Kashmir issue, in all issues of Mountbatten, of the UK, via Edwina, his lady friend. So Anyway, in the, yes, were you saying
No, so,
something?
so what did he have to say about what was the
Yeah.
condescending part?
Yeah. So he said, I am covering the length and breadth of the country, and it is so wonderful to see how I can, speak to these poor people, backward people, and raise their tone of mind, raise their intelligence, and I get to understand them. Like you stand outside a giraffe's cage and look at a giraffe and marvel at it. So it's that kind of tone. Oh my God, look at these people. It is so wonderful to see what they really are. So his tone is that of a person touring a zoo. So that part,
That's a very
his attitude,
that's a very European gaze, that I am the superior person looking at these
yes.
natives. So it's
Yeah. And maybe, that excerpt from Nehru's letter to Edwina, we'll put below this uh, YouTube video so people can read it for themselves. He was, he did work very hard, and we can say that he did not turn India into a dictatorship. But he was a person who was not at one with the Indian masses. The Indian masses loved him, and his personality cult became stronger and stronger and stronger, till finally it came to a very sad end with the China War in
62.
62.
Yeah.
After which he also died. But before that, there was this personality cult, and it was built by everything, by media, by naming everything after the Nehrus and Gandhis. And after that, if you watch the films of the 50s, the young children in those films are learning how to write kakha gagha, in Hindi, by writing Nehru. So it's like he was forced down our throats as something which was the foundation of this country. Which is obviously not true. So we have to, I suppose, give him credit. Or Utkarsh, don't you think that it's also true that the people of this country would not have stood for a dictatorship?
probably.
Indira Gandhi tried one. She tried one for 2-3 years. It was not sustainable. It was just not sustainable, because there was too much of protest, and there were not enough colluders. There were colluders, there always are, but it was not enough to sustain the idea of a dictatorship. So I also think that Nehru, he didn't try to become a dictator, but the people of India would not have let him be one. And to all those who say that, today we are in the middle of a personality cult and one party rule and what have you, the kind of one party rule that we have seen is just, today pales into insignificance in front of that. Because remember this maximum 74% of the seats, and also all the state governments except for one belonging to one party. And in that party, Jawaharlal Nehru was the first amongst equals to start with, and then far above everyone else, because you see Patel died very soon. Patel was the only one who had the stature to challenge him. And Rajendra Prasad became the president, so he became kind of not in the executive at all.
Yeah.
And the others who were still part of the old freedom struggle, so people like Jayaprakash Narayan, they did revolt in the end, because the personality cult was huge. But having said all that, in the end we will have to say, at least in my opinion, that the determination and the drive to conduct the elections, the first elections, was amazing. New things were done, innovative methods were used to solve problems, and there was this will that we will have elections, we will and they were also kind of dummy elections to teach people how to vote. So dummy elections were held, and if you see pictures of the ways in which people came to vote, it just seems like very different eras kind of collided. So you had tribes of the northeast, or anywhere, they would come in their own traditional dress, or you would have people who would come singing and dancing. So elections have always been a festival. And also the other thing is voter turnout. India has been pretty good in this. In the first elections, with all these terrible problems, we still had 45% turnout.
What is it like
And
right now?
after
And how does it compare versus...
today, last time it was 67%.
What's the US
And
like?
it come
Sorry, I'm just...
around 60.
Okay.
And the UK is also around 60.
Okay.
So we compare pretty favorably. In if you see our average from 1952 to now, it would be around 60%. But for us, in other countries, it's been falling because there's disinterest. For us, it's been going up. And 2019, 67% was the maximum, I think, of all elections. And in some places, it was even up to 81, 85% voting. So people have really taken part with full zest.
Yeah. And earlier you mentioned, I mean, we talked about this, right? That everybody was voting. What's the voting age in India? 18, right? So it's men, women, everybody voting above the age of 18.
Yes, but at the time, Utkarsh, it was 21.
21. So,
Yeah. So it became 18 just about 15 years ago, 15, 20 years ago.
so I mean, I'm not an expert on Western history, but if I remember correctly, in the West, is the UK or is it the US where women got the vote around the late 1910s? Around
Yeah, so in the US,
Yeah.
women got the vote in 1920.
1920, yes.
Yeah, and in the UK, women got the vote in 1928.
Okay.
After almost about 75 years of the suffragette movement. They had to really fight to get it. And that's the interesting next question about women. I'm sure that's what you were asking.
Yeah.
So the participation of women in the elections was really very, very at an excellent level. Maybe a little less than the men, but at a very good level. And the mere fact that they were given suffrage was different from most European countries. So in the country in which I live, Switzerland, women got the right to vote in stages in different cantons between 1971 and 1991.
What?
Yes. So, Utkarsh,
So,
even after you were born, some women didn't have the right to vote in Switzerland.
or to reframe this another way, in India, women have been allowed to vote 40 years before all Swiss women have been allowed to vote.
Yes. Yes.
That's very interesting. Any other
No, most countries, if you see this whole list of countries, list of Western countries, most of them it is in the 20s, 30s, 40s, but many other countries, again, it's in the 60s, in the 70s, in the 50s. So India is one of the early adopters. And there is a very good reason for this. The good reason for this is that during the time of the freedom struggle, women had come out in huge numbers to fight against the British. So there was a huge participation of women in the political process. And we had tall women leaders, like Sarojini Naidu. And they were the top level, say Sarojini Naidu or Vijay Lakshmi Pandit. These were at the top level. But at the very, very grassroots level, women in average families were involved in the freedom struggle. They joined the Congress. On Gandhi's call, they joined the Congress in great numbers for politics. And the other great strand of the freedom struggle, that is the armed struggle, the revolutionaries who fought with firearms, there were a huge number of women, such as Preeti Lata Wadekar. So, women were there in every part, whether it be politics, whether it be the armed struggle, and things like going around to all homes and speaking of this, explaining the stand of the Swarajis, explaining the stand of why we needed to kick out the British, and the Prabhat Pheris that the Congress used to do. So these Prabhat Pheris were early in the morning. They would make a little group, a mandali, and go around singing. So these songs would be devotional songs. These songs would be Desh Bhakti songs, and these were meant to arouse people, to make people aware of the need to throw out the British, and what would the benefits be and why we should have our own country. So many women were part of these Prabhat Pheris. Having been part of the freedom struggle, it seemed automatic that women would then very, organically be part of the universal adult suffrage idea. But this is, let's not downplay it in any way, Utkarsh. It's quite an amazing thing that at the same time, when we came into this modern democratic way of governance, you know that I have my own opinions on democracy and on forms of government, and I don't say that all forms of government which went before this were very bad. I don't agree with that. And I am also not someone who will say that all monarchies were bad. They were not. If you look at Travancore, you look at the Vodeyars of Mysore, they were perhaps the most developmentally oriented, welfare oriented, and progressive people in the entire country. And the indices of the places where they ruled, for example, Kerala or Karnataka or Tamil Nadu, these states are seen to be far ahead of the rest of the country. Why is that so? Because of the way in which they were ruled, and because of the way in which infrastructure was provided and welfare was provided, education was provided. So I am not one who says that democracy is the best, but for whatever it's worth, the modern form of democracy that we entered into, it is quite amazing that at one stroke everyone was enfranchised. No one was disenfranchised, and that's an achievement.
Yeah. Correct.
I am not yeah.
No, go ahead. Could you finish what you were saying?
I was just going to say that I am all for women voting, but I am afraid I am not all for certain constituencies being reserved for women. That is something I don't agree with at all. That's the latest constitutional amendment, which gives women 33% reservation. I am afraid I am completely against that. Maybe we can discuss it some other time.
Yeah, I was going to ask that, and I realized that would be a different tangent on affirmative action, which I think we can definitely go down that rabbit hole.
The history of affirmative action.
Yeah, that is a interesting one.
Yes.
Okay. We've kind of covered a lot of our questions throughout this process, which is fine because as long as information flows freely. So you said that the first central and state elections happened at the same time, and now they have diverged. So what is the thinking behind this particular way of operation?
So the interesting thing is, Utkarsh, you should ask me, why have they diverged?
Yes.
If all elections were held in the beginning at the same time, and the times are also, it's a 5-year period, whether it be a state government or the central government. So that was because the Congress party used to think of itself as the Red Queen. If they did not like any state government, they would dismiss it like that, off with his head. So this became a habit of the Congress government. So whenever it had some kind of disagreement with
does the central government have that kind of power?
Well, that's a good question. It did. Okay. Before a certain judgment, which is called the S.R. Bommai judgment, which came in the 90s, there is an article, I think it's 351, but I could be wrong, which gives the central government the right to, if there is a constitutional problem in the running of the state, if there is a law and order problem, there are certain conditions, then the central government can dismiss the state government and impose residence rule. So the Congress government used to use this clause very, very freely. It started off with all the governments being all state Congress chief ministers were there. So it was, like they are our subordinates. We can remove them whenever we like. So that was the habit. They changed chief ministers whenever they liked. In a few years' time, in say 10-15 years' time, the same thing did not operate. There were people who were from different parties who ran state governments. But the habits of the Congress did not change. And it became so egregious that then there were many cases filed, and this S.R. Bommai judgment tells us, it gave directions to the central government that it's not that easy. Very stringent conditions have to be fulfilled. And today, in the country, there is absolutely no support for the removing of any state government by the central government, no matter what happens. So we have seen law and order failures in West Bengal, for example. Very bad law and order failures. But the government has not been removed because the chief minister enjoys a huge democratic majority. Now, had it been Indira Gandhi, the chief minister would have been removed, God knows, a long time ago. So it is because of these reasons that state governments ended before 5 years. Then central governments also ended before 5 years, because after Nehru, when that whole one party, one man thing went away, then we had Lal Bahadur Shastri, who also died in very strange circumstances and very early. Then we had the Indira Gandhi period, and during the Indira Gandhi period, there were a lot of splits in the Congress. And because of these splits, there were a lot of political fallouts of these splits. Therefore, many governments could not fulfill their entire term. So now we have reached a situation where we have elections almost across the year. And today, one nation, one election has become something, something strange. But it is not something strange, it's where we started. That's how it was envisaged. Because today, you can say that we are perpetually in election mode. It's either a state government election or a central government election, or some election is always going on. Or a municipality election. So one nation, one election was the way it was envisaged in the constitution. But due to circumstances, things changed and many governments did not fulfill their entire term. Therefore, we have this many different elections at different times. However, to get one nation, one election, some very, very naughty issues will have to be unknotted. Because how can you give someone, fewer number of years than 5? You can't. Suppose next year you bring one nation, one election into play. Then you can't suddenly say that all the governments which have, say, 3 years, 2 years, 4 years left, you can't suddenly end their terms. So you will have to think about all these things. And what happens if the government falls?
That is the complexity. State governments can fall anytime. Or
so all these things have to be thought out very carefully before going in for this, because you can't control state or central governments. If they fall, they fall. But on the whole, I want to put on record that I think it's a good idea.
Since we talked about this, so how do other countries manage this problem? Like, say, the US, which is going to have elections this November. How do they manage between the states and the central? What's the difference between their system and India's system? Let's just go with that.
So it's a presidential system. You know that we took over the UK model, which is called the Westminster system, where there will be different parties asking for votes. The party which gets the maximum number of seats in the lower house, there are 2 houses, the upper house and the lower house. Whoever gets the maximum number of seats in the lower house will be asked to form a government. The head of that party, the leader of that party, will become the prime minister, who is the executive head of which, who's the actual operational head of government. And then there is the president. In our system, the president is a ceremonial head. You can very well imagine that the president is the counterpart of the Queen/King in the Westminster system. The Queen/King does not have any executive power. They just sign on whatever the government wants. The same thing is there for us. So this Westminster model was picked up by us lock, stock and barrel and used in India. But the presidential form of government, France has the presidential form of government. US has the presidential form of government. And it has only 2 parties. Not France, but the US. The US is very special in this, in having just 2 parties. And I think it has had a very deleterious effect on their polity, which we can discuss a little later. But to go on with this, the president is supported by 2 houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives, so the lower and the upper house. But the upper and the lower house. But for us, the lower house, that is the Lok Sabha, is the one which has the real power. For them, it is the Senate, the upper house, which has the real power in terms of legislation. So that's a big difference between the two. And of course, we are a multi-party system. I think in this election, there are 2,600 parties which are in the fray. Can you imagine? You don't know the names of 2,600. I don't know the names of 2,600.
Give me 2,600.
Let's start one, Utkarsh.
I can't. I'm
We
not
can.
Indian.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
So, well, I can. I can. Only thing is that, I have to get a certain percentage of votes to be able to be registered as a percentage for a national level party is 4% of national vote. Then you have different percentages set for state and then for local level participation. So that could be a bit difficult. But then, nothing stops you from registering a party. But there's another interesting thing, very current to the situation that is there in the US. In India, if you have a criminal record, if you have a conviction, you cannot be prime minister or president. In the US, there's no such bar. So even if you are a criminal, you can be the president. You can be sworn in from the jail. And it's very pertinent in the case of Trump, because you see so many cases have been registered against him. Today, a very important criminal case has been started against him. Suppose he is convicted in that one. He can still run for president. And of course, the elections for president are not absolutely direct, as in you don't give one vote to Trump or one vote to Biden, but there is an electoral college. That electoral college gives certain number of votes to each state, and each state is won by whichever candidate, and then those number of electoral college votes go into the kitty of that candidate. So it's a little bit indirect, but on the whole, you see how the situation unfolds. It's like a personality cult.
Yeah, yeah.
So you're voting for either this one or that one. In the US, of course, more than a personality cult, it's a party cult.
Yeah.
So if you're a Republican, you're a die-hard Republican. If you're a Democrat, you're a die-hard Democrat. Whereas we have a multi-party system. So I feel, again, in my very humble opinion, that's a much better way of expressing the desires and expressing the political goals from the last mile. Because each and every small person can have a party. Now look at the US. Suppose you don't like either the Republicans or the Democrats. What choice do you have?
Robert Kennedy Jr.
Yeah, that too now. But in terms of a real choice, do you think Robert Kennedy Jr. is a real choice? He isn't. So there's always some independent candidate or some Green Party candidate or someone like that, but they don't matter. And that has made people, I think, the lines are very hard between Republicans and Democrats. I believe now Republicans don't want to marry Democrats and vice versa.
Yeah, that's just the polarization in society, right? That's
Yeah. So I think this two-party system leads to a lot of polarization. Our multi-party system that way is much better. Now in the Senate and in the House of Representatives, there is a certain limit for them. So after that limit, after every 2 years, for example, voting is held. So that goes on irrespective of the presidential elections. And the elections for the governor of each state, who is like, say, the chief minister of our Indian system, that also goes on. They have their own terms and they have their own system which goes on. But somehow that has not become such an issue in the US. In India, it has become an issue because for us, elections somehow mean that everything else has to stop. And now, only elections. We will not talk about or think about anything else. So that is detrimental to governance. And that is detrimental to policy making. So for us, it is an issue. I don't think that it has become an issue at all in the US. There are certain periods, for example, the middle of the term of any president, such is the cycle that there are some very important elections. Some important states have the governor elections, and then there are many senatorial elections. And that is kind of seen as a statement on whoever is the president. But it's just a statement on the president. The president doesn't have to stop working, etc. In India, it is a bit of a problem, this perpetual election mode.
Yeah. So it's a good segue to what I wanted to ask you. So, and of course, these are suggestions. I mean, there are political experts out there. But from your perspective, what are the potential improvement points for India's elections, India's system, and especially since you in particular do study the Mauryan system, the Kautilyan system, do you have any insights from that on what you think can be reapplied? And not just that, also things that you observe today. Technology today is different from the technology of 1947 or technology of whenever where the Westminster system was instituted. Do you have any suggestions for what could be different or what could be better?
No, so I think that this one nation, one election is very much needed.
Okay.
And that really needs to be done. So that's one thing. But as far as, insights from the Kautilyan system of governance is concerned, Kautilya was not a person who was particularly rooting for democracy, because for him it was the monarch, the monarchical system. It was the marriage of the monarchical system with some kind of say that the people had in what they needed to get. This was what his system was. And the other thing, the question you asked me about Kautilya, in Kautilya's system of governance, the few things that he really focuses on are, welfare and delivery of welfare and efficiency of administration, cleanliness and smoothness of administration in terms of corruption. These are the things that he deals with. These are not for him democratic matters. But today all these are issues of democracy. These are the things on which elections are fought. So the crux of the governance issues in Kautilya are all very much applicable, but his system of governance is a monarchical one, albeit with reference to the will of the people, which is ascertained through different ways. So I think we'll have to take the principles of governance that he espouses rather than the system. The system, of course, is different. Although even there are echoes of some kind of democracy and self-rule at the village level. But not at the higher level, at the village level. And also, there were guilds over in those times. Those guilds were like proto-corporates. So they were people like Goldsmiths Guild or Carpenters Guild or Silversmiths Guild. So these people were also a self-governing agglomerate. And they mostly governed themselves. For some things, they used to go to the king. So within these guilds, you can say that there was democracy within these guilds. And they looked after all kinds of welfare, social, political, cultural, everything of their guild members. And they also set down the law for their guild members. For some certain important things, suppose there was a murder or a robbery or a rape or something, then they would go to the king. So there were kind of circles of governance. The system of governance is not exactly applicable or comparable, but the principles are very much comparable. I told you some of them just now.
That makes sense.
Could we be a little result oriented? I mean, could we have a formal report card of the representative of each constituency? Not just because he wants to give it or just because he's saying something in an election rally, but a formal legal document. That these are the things I had promised I would do and these are the things I could do. Remember that each person gets a lump sum to spend in his or her constituency. So how do they spend it? What have they done? And it's not easy to operate in any constituency because we have governments at local level, then we have district level, we have state level, and we have central level. All these have different subjects. There are some central subjects, there are some state subjects, and the residual powers lie with the center. Whatever is not written down in both these or in the concurrent list, it lies with the center. So it's not going to be very easy. But I still think that some steps should be taken to formalize the things that the representatives say that they are going to do and the things that they actually do. And we could have a report card at the end of the day and leave it to the people to decide. You tried to get say railway or you tried to get some roads made and you could not do it. But just put it in your report card. Whether or not your success or failure was warranted will be decided by the people. Because I feel that it's very easy to make election promises, but very difficult to actually come through with your promises. The first time that this is being seen from 2014, that the BJP is actually doing things that are written in its manifesto. Otherwise, and it was very astonishing in 2016 or 2019 or 20, when they did certain things which were written in the manifesto, the whole country was shocked, surprised. For example, removing the Article 370. It was written in the manifesto. But you see, we don't take manifestos seriously. So we did not take it seriously. And when they actually did it, it was people were stunned. So manifestos should be more formal documents. And we should test parties on their manifestos.
Does any other country do that?
What they could not do.
Does any other country?
I don't think so. No. And I wonder why. Is it because it's very difficult?
I think the context of what is required for good governance at any point always changes, possibly.
So why give the people a chance to decide? The context may have changed. You may have wanted a lake in your city, but then, okay, fine, you don't want a lake. You want a railway. Still, write it down, judge it.
Yeah.
Because otherwise there's a lot of hot air.
So I'll give you a good example, right? I mean, scorecards can have many, many different effects. And you see this, I mean, I'm speaking of it through my lens of a corporate world, where if you make something a scorecard, it drives action. But sometimes the action is just for the sake of the scorecard, not necessarily the result that the scorecard is supposed to achieve. So if you look at what's happening in China, for example, the governments had the provinces or whatever they're called in China, I'm forgetting the word. They had significant GDP growth targets, right? Big source of GDP growth for a lot of, again, I'm forgetting provinces, prefecture is Japanese, the different regions in China. The way the local governments used to do it is they used to do land sales. And they encouraged the developers to get over leveraged to sell even more and more land. And we all know what's happening with the Chinese.
But Utkarsh Mohan, China is not a democracy.
Fair enough. I'm just trying to talk about scorecards here. I'm not talking about democracy.
Yeah, so if we have a scorecard and we leave it to the people to judge that scorecard, if that scorecard is good on apparent reaching of certain goals, but with no governance effects, people will know that.
True.
I am a great believer in the wisdom of the people. So anyway,
I'm
it's
also
just
a believer in
suggestion.
it, but I think that there are short-term distortions that may color things. So sometimes tough medicine is needed. I'll give you a good example right now, right? One issue that the whole world has right now. In fact, you look at the Korean elections recently, the opposition did much better. The president is basically a lame duck at the moment. It's cost of living. Cost of living is an issue right now everywhere.
Yeah.
Whether you're in Singapore, whether you're in the US. Now, the fact of the matter is, it is not the fault of the Korean government or the Singapore government or any other government. I mean, there are many we don't get into that rabbit hole whose fault it is. There are multitude disruptions due to COVID, extra money poured into the system. I mean, but then to the people, the fault is of the existing government, right? So what I'm saying is, not everybody is aware that the Fed Reserve pumped in so much money into the economy, and then this happened, and blah blah blah. So that's where I think this kind of the wisdom of the masses sometimes for me breaks down, at least in the short term. Long term, yes. But then how do you account for that? It's a difficult question.
And I don't know whether if you are excusing any government on the basis of international situations, I would say that government should have done something better to deal with that international situation.
Absolutely.
For example, India also faced the same thing with the Fed reserves and also faced the same advice to spend a lot of money, to be profligate. It was not profligate.
Yes.
Not spend a lot of money. It is reaping the benefits of that.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So why should the government not pay for not being able to deal with the international situation properly? I think it should pay for it. But having said all that, of course, Utkarsh, I mean, this is an idea which is not even being considered anywhere, this scorecard business.
So let's just take the Japanese government for an example, right? The Japanese government spends a huge percentage of their budget paying the debt, paying the interest on the debt, because Japanese government debt is super high, several times GDP, historical reasons. Now, what happened as a consequence of that? When the Fed raised rates, the Japanese government could not raise rates, because if they raise rates, the entire government budget will go towards servicing debt. So the yen basically collapsed 50% versus the dollar. Now, whatever you buy and produce in Japan, it remains the same, but everything else becomes 50% more expensive. Your iPhone becomes 50% more expensive, etc. etc.
So you're trying to excuse the government is not their fault.
No, I'm not saying it's not their fault. I mean, the fault is of the Japanese government as a whole. What I'm saying is there are short-term distortions that even if you have the best government in town,
yes, so Utkarsh, these short-term distortions will show up in democratic results.
Yes.
That's the way of democracy.
I think that is the point.
So then, we can always debate democracy versus some other system, but that's a totally different discussion.
Yes. Yeah. What was the other thing that I wanted to ask? I'm trying to remember. Have you seen over the last 50, 60, longer than that, years, how has beyond the timings of elections changing for state and central, has the Indian system changed in the last 50, 60 years? And do you see any changes going forward? Has it been exactly as...
No, the Indian system has not changed, because there has been, no kind of major change in the constitution. So, Indira Gandhi tried some major changes in the constitution when she was there during the emergency, but they were struck down. Okay. After she lost power, they were all struck down. So, major earthquake kind of changes, suddenly that states become more powerful than central government, etc. Those things have not changed. But some of the principles of the constitution are now being applied better. For example, that there should be free and fair elections. Okay. Like I told you, elections were anything but free and fair. It was a profession. Being a booth capturer was actually a profession. Because you could go around from election to election capturing booths, and it involved a lot of violence and deaths. And not just in Bihar. I've seen it in Bihar, but it was across the country. So that has become much better, because I think people as a whole have changed and are no longer willing to be intimidated by violence. However, we cannot say that it is perfect. West Bengal is a terrible example of intimidation. It has been pulled up by the courts a number of times. But the party and the government has not changed its stripes. So, the Trinamool Congress is like a red terror kind of communist group. So, they are very much into party positions in every village and city, and those party positions lead to all the lucrative things of contracts, of businesses, etc., and of positions in governance. The party, the government, and the people are very closely intertwined, and if you don't want to be intertwined, then there is a lot of violence, intimidation, killing. You've heard of Sandesh Khali, where rape has been used as a political tool because of this person who wanted to control the resources of that district. He wanted to make everything into, make it for fishing. Because fishing rights over there are very, very lucrative. So he wanted everyone to change from farming to fishing. So he was taking over all the lands and politics. So intimidation still exists. And West Bengal is a very good example of that. But on the whole, this booth capturing and beating people up and not letting them vote has come down a lot. The electoral rolls and the election ID card has also made a difference in that. But Utkarsh, it's not foolproof. You have false ID cards, you have false Aadhaar cards. It's not a foolproof situation. But it has improved a lot. So this free and fair business has improved a lot. And then the independence of the states. So earlier, during Nehru's time, even during Indira's time, states were like little children of the center. Totally to be directed, get up now, go to sleep now, do this now, do that now. States are not like that now. States have their own power and they exercise that power. They are not going to let the center exercise that power for them. So I think that is another thing which has changed. States have come into their own, which is both good and bad. Some states do very well after coming into their own, some don't. But given that, state governments are important political institutions in their own right, I think that's a great development. That states have weaned themselves away from the center, although, they are they rely on the center for a lot of things, finance, ways and means advances. So if they need something, they have to go to the center. But as political entities, they are standing up for themselves. So what else has changed? The number of political parties are only increasing, Utkarsh. It's difficult to keep track. So many political parties. You look at Kerala. This is one of the tiniest states in the country with the maximum number of parties, because each caste group has a party. Each religious group, each church group, each Islamic group, they all have parties. And that's why they have come together in this United Democratic Front, which is the Congress, and the Left Democratic Front, which is the Communists. So for an outsider to enter into this system is extremely difficult, because very small interest groups also are tied into larger interest groups. So it can be both good and bad. Perhaps it's good also, a greater number of political parties, but perhaps also there's a level of frivolousness and wastage of political capital in this. And then, the power of the election commission, please don't get taken in by all those people who are crying that the election commission is toothless. We've seen toothless election commissions who were puppets in the hands of the respective prime ministers. Today's election commission has a lot of power of its own, and it exercises those powers. The role of money has come down to some extent, Utkarsh. I wouldn't say that it's some wonderful level playing field, it's not. But the role of money has come down, because expenditures have been set at certain levels, and the election commission sends observers to check whether that has been followed or not. Of course, given by the amount of cash which has already been seized by the election commission officials, perhaps the less said about this, the better. But I feel that the needle is moving in the right direction. So on the whole, I feel that elections are becoming a greater representation of the people's wishes than they used to be earlier.
Yeah, and I guess there's still a long way to go in terms of voter turnout if you're still only at 67%.
No, but no, Utkarsh. Actually, that's an amazing percentage if you compare it with others. In other countries, it's even down to 50 or 40. I just gave you the example of the US and the UK. India is one of the countries with the highest turnout in the world. Highest and increasing. So, participation of the citizen in politics is pretty good in India. Pretty good. And Utkarsh, each rickshaw puller or your driver or your maid or the person who's selling mangoes on the street, everyone has their own political position.
That's true.
And you are not going to be able to browbeat them into changing their political position. Which is why elections throw up such surprises in 2004. Who would have thought that the Congress and its coalition will win? Nobody. Because the government had been doing well apparently, and India was shining, etc., and then they lost. Shock. Indira Gandhi lost in the 1980 elections. Shock. So the Indian voters are a very canny lot. And they can give anyone a stunning shock as and when they want. And that's what I like about them. We don't have, okay, this is a red state and this is a blue state and XYZ. People change their minds every election. I have voted in a number of elections before I came here. I used to change my mind every election depending on who was standing for election and which party I liked at that point of time. So I have a really eclectic voting record. I have voted for almost all the parties, which are the major parties which are there today. I've lived in Maharashtra, I've lived in Himachal, I have lived in Delhi, and most people are like that. So I think the Indian voter is really smart, and it gives people very unpleasant surprises. So no one can feel absolutely smug and confident. I am going to win. They may just get a slap in the face. So
Good. Is there anything else we wanted to cover? Central states, election. Not bad. I think we kind of covered everything. Maybe not in the
yeah,
technical
just
direction.
I think but the issue of what will change in future elections, I think technology will become more and more important.
Of course.
Whether it is in terms of EVMs or counting, or in terms of election campaigning, in terms of use of social media, videos, all that is just going to become more and more important. And honestly, as a voter, Utkarsh, I feel a little apprehensive of this.
Because you have a
Because
black
there's
box
so
which
much
no one,
information.
and also
Yeah.
you'll have a black box information that no one can independently verify. That will be the
Yes.
difficulty.
Yes. So I don't know whether that video of X, Y, and Z is correct or not. How am I to decide? I cannot be everywhere. I do not know the ground situation. So I dread misinformation.
Yeah.
That is, I think, one of the biggest
I think
things.
it's
But then
bigger
that's
than
not an
I
Indian
think,
problem.
Yeah, it's bigger than democracy or India or elections.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
something
It's-
facing the world as a whole.
Yes, absolutely. But then technology is also going to help in so
Of
many
course,
ways, because
yeah.
a lot of wrongdoing can also be immediately brought out through technology.
Yeah.
So I am also, my constituency is Gorakhpur, and although the Supreme Court has said that non-resident Indians can vote at the embassy wherever they are staying, this has not yet been operationalized. So I'm hoping there's still some time to go. My constituency votes on 1st June.
Okay.
So I'm hoping that I'll get the chance to vote here. Otherwise, who knows? I may just dash to Gorakhpur and vote and come back.
Splash and dash and vote.
Yes, vote and come back.
Good. Okay, good. I think we covered a fair bit.
Yes.
I think we ended up doing the same format as normal, but that's okay. Maybe we will be.
Yes. We'll also learn.
We'll also learn.
After telling people that we are going to experiment, we kind of forgot ourselves. I think what happens is that we start talking Utkarsh and then we forget about structure.
And that's how some information comes out. I mean, that is the entire nature of the podcasting medium, frankly. But yes.
Yes.
Good. I hope you.
Okay, next time.
Yeah, we'll
Hot
try
questions
again.
next time. Yeah.
We'll try again next time.
And we'll tell people our next week's topic and invite questions
Yes,
from them.
and we'll make sure to cover all of them in the
Yes.
in the podcast.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right, folks. Then we'll end it here. Thank you so much, and we will keep a lookout for our questions. I think on X, probably.
Yes. Yeah, on X. Check it out at my Twitter handle.
Yeah.
That's at SV Oja.
X handle.
Yeah, X handle at SV Oja. So I'll be posting the topic and asking for your questions. And everyone, go out and vote. The elections start in less than a week. Go out and vote. I will.
Yes. All right. Take care, everyone.
Okay. Namaste. Take care.